Hi there, Graham Vincent, violin maker and occasional musician. Occasional in the pandemic. I'm looking forward to it being a bit busier than we have been. Right, as a violin maker, obviously tools are pretty important to me, and I've spent a large part of my life gathering tools together, which means I've got a ridiculous amount of tools. What I've tried to do in the last couple of years is actually put together a sort of toolkit of the essential stuff, which I guard with my life effectively. And it also means I'm not hunting around amongst thousands of tools for the few that I do use. So, I probably ought to have a massive eBay sale and get rid of half of the stuff that I'm not using. I think that would delight my wife. But I thought it'd be really interesting to show you the sort of the tools that I use every day, really. And there are some things that I use regularly that aren't in here, and I will try and sort of mention those as I go. But this is the fundamental sort of basic toolkit that I use all the time. So, right, I put together a box. It's just made out of plywood. The actual sort of main carcassing is just 12mm ply. The front is just a thin piece of ply. Same with the back. The handles and also the hinges and catch are just 18mm birch ply. I did the handles and the catch just very simply. These are just fixed from the inside, and the catch has just got a nail with a polished end holding it together. And the hinges are a little bit more interesting. Just with the price of hinges, and these are so much more easy to fix and glue on. They work really well with a wooden construction. I've made lots of wooden hinges. Actually, perhaps I ought to show you some of the other ones I've made. A very simple handle, sort of through bolted and glued on. So, what's in it? There it is. So I think probably the most sensible thing to do is to go through it tool type by tool type, if that makes sense. So I suppose we start with marking out, don't we? In here I've got a couple of templates of my more standard items. And then there's where's pencils? One thing I find incredibly useful are these fairly cheap electronic gauges. They're just great, and considering the price, this is one of the most useful tools of all. It's so good for just measuring the thickness of things very quickly and easily. Yeah, I love that little thing. Use it all the time, and that just lives in there. So marking out again, squares, got a square there. So we've got squares, rulers, templates, pencils, digital calipers, and that little thing there as well. So we've marked stuff out. Then cutting. Let's start with saws, shall we? One of my favourite saws is this beast. Beautifully thin, leaves a tiny kerf, cuts on the pull like most Japanese saws. Just very easy to use, razor sharp at the moment, not massively expensive. It's only in the last sort of 5 years that I've started using Japanese saws, and I really am a convert. Also, this little flush cutting saw. So that's again got a tiny kerf, and I use it in ways which probably it isn't designed for, this because this is designed for cutting things off flush with the surface, but I just use it as a general saw in addition to that. Then the other saw that I use a lot, this tiny little X-Acto saw, which again has such a small kerf. Really useful. Then we sort of get on to knives. Everyone needs a good knife in their toolkit. These ones are the ones I use day to day, all the time. Carving, I mean, things like necks, scrolls, the edge work on violins, so many things, the F-holes, all sorts of stuff. They're absolutely indispensable. I also use just a good old-fashioned scalpel. That's a great thing as well. I think that's it on the knife front. I almost forgot. What's becoming one of the most important tools in my toolkit at the moment is a pair of glasses so I can see what I'm doing. So there we go. Right, where do we get up to? Shall we do planes? One of my all-time favourite tools is the Stanley 60.5A. I've had this since I was 18. It's just absolutely gorgeous. It's got a sliding mouth, so you can vary the actual mouth in front of the blade. Just it's a lovely size. The 9.5A is just a little bit bigger. I just love this 60.5A. It just sits beautifully in the hand. The mighty number 7 is just absolutely glorious. Mainly for jointing sort of fronts and backs, but a few other little jobs as well. Fantastic piece of kit, that one. At the other extreme, on the plain front, I love this little thing. I made this when I was about 20. I've made a new blade for it. I've made a new wedge for it recently, but it's a little bit of African blackwood, and I just somehow just got it absolutely right when I made this one. It just works beautifully. And the other one I use quite a lot now is something which I've tried to geometrically set it up about the same. You'll see that the sole is about the same size. But this is a toothed one, and that again is so useful when you're dealing with sort of figured maple and what have you, when you're carving the front and what have you. Very useful when you're doing sort of bee stings, etc. Purfling, fine little bits and pieces when you want to have a good look in there. And this one especially with the light on it. That's really, really wonderful. The other two things in this box are 2 coins. And for me, that's pretty much the perfect size for a heel cap. Then, what else have we got in here? Right, let's just have a look. I mean, obviously, chisels and gouges. Chisels and gouges, pretty important. Get yourself the best gouges you can afford. This is one I've had for years. I will go through and I think all of these groups of tools I will look at and discuss how to sharpen them as well, but not in this video. So I've had that one and that one, which is a nice wide flat one, for years and years, and I must admit I did go a little bit wild and buy those two recently. This is one of my favourite tools of all time. It's just a boxwood handled Marples chisel. I think it's, what is it? It looks like it's 7/8 or something like that. But it's just a glorious size. It's such a good tool. It cuts beautifully. And when that is nice and sharp, there's nothing better. Then a nice paring chisel is worth its weight in gold. I happen to use 2 really. I use the slightly better sort of the 1-inch one, and I also use a little 1/4-inch one a lot of the time. That's a lovely tool. Again, I've had that one since I was 18 or 19. So then moving along, I mean, there are obviously other things like a good old-fashioned kitchen knife, which is incredibly useful for opening up sort of things, just getting into taking the fronts off violins and so on. What else we've got? We've got a square, which I mentioned, I think. Then we've got things like a peg hole reamer. Obviously, as a violin maker, you need a peg hole reamer. You also need things like a peg cutter for cutting the taper on pegs. Then we've got all sorts of other gubbins in this shelf. What have we got in here? Just silly little things like a clamp for holding bridges. So you know, when you're shaping your bridges, when you're cutting bridges, you just stick that in the vise, and then you can just slide the bridge into it, and it will hold it. Soundpost setting tool, various files, and then scrapers, obviously. Scrapers are a pretty important part of the violin making toolkit, so let's just hoik that out. I kind of got various shapes really. That one with a sharp end on it's really useful. Then just a nice standardish one. These are just shapes I've kind of ended up with to do jobs that I have to do. This kind of elongated egg one is very useful. What was I doing? I think I was making something completely different, and I just filed that in the corner to produce a nice shape. And then files, loads of files. Obviously we use them for things like sharpening scrapers, but more importantly they are a really important part of violin making as well. You actually use them on the violin itself. So I just have a collection of those, some straight, some not. That's a lovely one, that's really useful. What else have we got in here? Oh, some more gouges, because you can never have enough. Oh, and in here, 2 pairs of glasses. Okay, that's a bit extravagant. Lots of little files, needle files and the like. Ah, here we go. Pens, pencils, stuff for marking out. Right, these aren't necessarily traditional violin making tools, but especially if you're cutting timber by hand, a good old-fashioned marking gauge is very useful, as is a sliding bevel for cutting things like the neck angle on neck blocks. And then that's just love and other odds and sods. Right, that's it. I'm going to tidy up my toolbox again, and that was such a fleeting run through what's in there, but I think you probably sort of gathered a general idea about what's in there. I think that's it then for this week. I will do a more detailed look at all of these and how to sharpen them and how I use them. I'm not saying it's the only way to do things, it's just how I do things. So please look at it like that. Right, cheers folks, hope you enjoyed it.